Korea's literary arena is marking a new milestone as author Han Kang has been named the winner of this year's Nobel Prize for Literature. On Press Perspective today, we touch upon the critical acclaim over Han's writing and more. Welcome to Friday's edition of Press Perspective, our new panel session with members of the press as well as pundits on issues of interest largely pertaining to South Korea. Now, demand for author Han Kang's books both offline and online has been soaring following news of her winning this year's Nobel Prize for Literature. Accordingly, today we touch upon foreign media coverage of K-literature and K-architecture, if you will, in recent times. For this, I have Andrew Salmon with the Washington Times here in the studio. Andrew, welcome.
Good to see you.
I also have Jack Barton, a freelance journalist based here in South Korea. Jack, it's a pleasure.
Pleasure to be back.
Right, Andrew, author Han Kang has become the first Korean writer to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. What do you suppose the significance of this achievement?
I mean, it is significant. If you're a bookish literary person, you already know Han Kang. She won the International Booker back in 2016. But if you're a Neanderthal, you don't read books, and you hear, oh, Nobel Prize, that's as big as it gets in international prizes. So, you know, I think K-lit has come of age. If you think that, you know, BTS have topped all global charts, Parasite won the Oscar, and now Korean literature, Nobel Prize. So for the average person, the guy in the street, this is very, very big, even if you just don't read books, which many people don't. And of course for Korea, which has always been very ambitious about getting a Nobel, it's sensational. I mean, I was having a coffee this afternoon, and this elderly guy came up to me with a chosen elbow and said, "Have you seen this? Isn't this great?" And I said, yes. So the people are happy. Second Nobel for Korea. First one, of course, Kim Dae-jung Nobel Peace Prize, which is the Nobel of Nobels. And now Han Kang has the Literary Prize. And they both tread on rather similar territory. DJ, for many years, had been an activist against authoritarianism. And of course, Han Kang's literature covers many of the darker areas of modern Korean literature. So they make an interesting kind of duo if you look at it through that prism.
Right. Han Kang's book Human Acts, which covers, of course, the 1980 Gwangju Uprising. Jack, speaking to members of the media, Han Kang's father, who is also a writer, Han Seung-won, handed much credit to the English translations of her works for garnering the latest critical acclaim. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, Deborah Smith did the translation. I did read the book when it came out. And obviously, my Korean's not so great that I can really tell if it's a great translation, but it has been credited as part of the success. I must admit, when I read it at the start, I thought it was a good book, but I wouldn't say the quality of the literature is Nobel level, but what I think it is the topic. Even President Yoon said today, it's about, you know, turning painful episodes of the past into great literature. And in The Vegetarian, she's really dealing with painful episodes that are still with us in the modern era. So looking at the patriarchy, the male gaze, the sort of gender issues, the issues around being a carnivore or vegetarian, the pain of the world, and sort of the unease of modern living. And we see that with the hikikomori, you know, people who retire back into their homes. And in a way, this is sort of a metaphor, wanting to come back and become a plant. It's a metaphor for this kind of social phenomenon. So it's very relevant to South Korea, but I think it's also something many people around the world can relate to. So it's very topical. And when we see the Nobel Prize for Literature handed out, it's often for the theme more than the quality of the writing. And I think this is the case. When you look at the book, she has really ticked every box in terms of dealing with this issue. And again, it's very relevant to South Korea, but it's an issue that so many people all around the world can relate to. And so I think this, more than the translation, is really what's carried the book to this level.
And Jack, generally speaking, do you suppose this latest development, this latest event, of course, would raise greater interest in Korean books in the international
Absolutely,
stage?
and there's some great Korean books out there. I mean, not just South Korea. We were talking before we came on the accusation by the anonymous writer Bandi in North Korea, which I think is just a superb piece of literature that should have won so many prizes. It's not just a great insight into life in North Korea, but it's actually it's terrifically wrote. You know, the characters and the subplots and that should have won so many prizes. It's kind of criminal that it's been left in the shadows. And there is so much great Korean literature, really good Korean, new and old. So that is one thing I certainly hope, that this will shine the spotlight. And I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will shine the spotlight on her earlier novels as well as on the work of many other writers.
Right. Right, then moving from Korean books to traditional Korean buildings, if you will. Andrew, you recently wrote an article on Hanoks for the Washington Times. What was the gist of your coverage first?
It was kind of twofold. One, the good news was that I think across Korea now we're seeing a very, very late but a renewed interest in Hanok, in traditional Korean cottages, if you will. But it's come very, very late, especially for Seoul, given that the bulldozers have been doing their work for decades, and there's just a tiny, tiny number of these things left in the country. And I hate to say it, but the sort of Korea's greatest generation, the guys, men and women who are working in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, who grew up in this fast-changing Korea, didn't see the value of old things, legacy things. And so many of these old things were destroyed, and of course, this land of apartments has been raised in its place, which is why Seoul is a funky and enjoyable city to live in, but it's not a beautiful looking city because so much of the heritage has been destroyed. So this new interest in it among the young generation is very, very positive. I think even young people don't really want to live in a Hanok, which was its original aim, but to turn them into cafes, bars, coffee shops, pensions. That's happening. And of course, now that you've got the first ever undergraduate course in Hanok design and creation, that means that the tradition will continue into the future, and that's good news. The problem, of course, is, and the broader underlying problem is, will even the young generation be able to overcome the fact that if you're Korean now, if you've got money, you tend not to invest in the stock markets or the capital markets. You put your money into property, into bricks and mortars. And due to population densities here, if you want property to make money, you've got to build as high as you can. So this is what is destroying not just Hanok, but low-rise architecture across this city, which is a great aesthetic loss.
Right, and before we delve even further deeper into that, Jack, how do you explain the younger Koreans' interest in the Hanoks of their older counterparts?
Well, I think Andrew just touched on the rapid pace of development in Korea. And it's kind of understandable when you think about that incredible transition from poverty to one of the world's richest countries, that a lot of, the old stuff's going to get knocked down. That's just very understandable with that pace of development. But there always comes a point in every country. I mean, it's been magnified in South Korea because the pace and the scope of the change was so massive. But I think we see in many countries this happens. There is a period of progress, and in looking back and people going, oh, hang on, we've lost something, or we're losing something. Or look at the quality of what we did in the past. Look at the artisan aspect of what we did in the past. You know, we need to save this before it's lost. And I think young Koreans, this is the generation. We're seeing the economy is changing. They don't have those steady jobs. They're looking at other things. They're looking at a freer, more artistic sort of lifestyle. They're looking to work less hours, to have a more creative input. And so the Hanok is a natural symbol of this. And not just because of its artisan quality, but if you look at the modern apartment blocks, it's interior living. But the Hanok offers interior and exterior space. So it connects you back with the world again, with the garden, with the world around you, with the community, and everybody loves this. And I think Andrew's right. People aren't going to rush out and buy a Hanok or build a Hanok, but it's this concept. So we see a lot of fusion architecture, just trying to incorporate that sort of space or feeling. The cafes you mentioned, you go in, you'll see the higher Hanok ceiling, a lot of light, connection with the outside and the garden space, and just trying to reintegrate those very great Korean cultural aspects back into modern architecture. And architects like Moon Hoon, who does very modern buildings, and some could argue, well, that's not really a Hanok. But what he's doing is fusing that outside space with the inside space with those traditional elements in a very modern architecture. And I think that's more where young people will be going. Hanok elements, some Hanoks, and some of this sort of, but it is changing architecture. We might not see pure Hanoks in the old sense again, but certainly it's going to change the architectural direction of Korea, I think.
Right. Now, Andrew, based on your coverage, I believe you spoke about the presence of a few dozen Hanoks remaining. Am I right? How many Hanoks
Oh, no, I mean,
are
there's several 100,000 across the country, although it's not clear from the data what constitutes a Hanok. Some of those are just like a pavilion in a park, In Seoul, I think we're looking at just the low thousands. And of course, many of those Hanoks are probably just chunks of Hanoks. And of course, what's happened in recent years is that most of the so-called traditional Hanoks have been bulldozed and completely new Hanoks have been raised. And we see this all over Bukchon, for example, which is this supposedly traditional Hanok district. But yeah, I mean, again, as Jack was saying, we're moving from Hanok to neo-Hanok. I mean, it's inevitable. So, the future is, I'm not convinced it's a great future, but we might see a turnaround as people in their 20s and 30s, this new generation of Koreans who look to Hanok and other aspects of traditional culture as being desirable, start getting money and power, one would hope. One of our interviewees down at the university, at Chungbuk University, said, my friends say to me, what you're doing is old-fashioned, and that's very new. So there is some hope.
So Chungbuk University, Chungbuk National University,
Correct.
That's the school that has a bachelor degree in Hanok
Correct.
architecture.
Yeah.
And you covered that in your story as well.
Yeah. I mean, that suggests there is hope for the future, that by this tiny thread, we will maintain the continuity. Take Taekyon, the traditional Korean martial art that predated Taekwondo. That was within one master, one man, of complete extinction. But he taught enough students, and they taught enough students, that there was a national revival in the 90s. And now Taekyon, when I first came to Korea, most Koreans had never heard what Taekyon was, because there was just this one master. Nowadays, you can learn it anywhere, so it's been resurrected from the dead. One might hope for something traditional with Hanok, but it's not a certainty.
Right.
It's a hope.
Jack, I understand you've also covered this academic initiative by Chungbuk National University. Could you tell us a bit about your coverage and what were some of your takeaways from it?
Yeah, I was filming down there for part of a documentary. And what I really liked about their course was they have the course there for full-time people who are just focusing on Hanok and building, but they also had a very large component of their course is training handy people, men and women, who already work in construction or to update their skills, so it includes Hanok in repair. And this is very important because it's not all about building new Hanoks, it's about preserving the ones that are out there. And these are the local skilled people in the communities that can do it. My wife is Korean, of course my grandmother, my Korean grandmother, she's in her mid-80s, she still lives in the only Hanok in the village. It's beautiful with a wall around it and the garden, and she refuses to go. But she'd been there more than half a century, and it's changed. She used to have the traditional kitchen with the stove outside and the elements, and that's gone, and there's a stove inside now, and there's a more modern door, and the wax paper is now replaced with a sort of lino, but it's still the heated floor, and it's still paper sliding doors inside, and when you look at it, it's definitely a Hanok. But these places need upkeep and repair. And the people who are now doing the houses all around her that have been built, they don't have the skills to do this. So I think this is the critical aspect of what the university is doing, is taking tradies who do brick and plaster and also teaching them all the Hanok upkeep skills. Because there will be generations coming into the houses like this all around the country that, of course, these young people will want to come out and buy this and preserve those Hanok elements But of course, modernize them and maybe put some glass walls. But it needs these tradespeople to be able to do this with genuine skills. So it's absolutely valuable. That was the bit that really struck me. I thought that was a wonderful idea that wasn't obvious, but it was a great idea, and it'll have a big impact, I think.
Right, hopefully. Andrew, your coverage, it also included, something I found quite intriguing was that your coverage also included Korean words to describe all things Korean and trends Korean. What I mean is words like 골목, to describe the quaint, narrow passageways between buildings was used as it is. You used the word 재개발, which refers to redevelopment also. What was your intention of including Korean words in your English article?
Well, I think these... I'm not sure what the exact translation of 재개발 is. Koreans translate it as a redevelopment order. We might call it a compulsory purchase order. But this is when basically a huge swathe of land is designated by local governments for redevelopment. Everybody who lives there is ejected, and they might get one of the apartments, which will subsequently be raised. But of course, this is just destroying neighborhood after neighborhood after neighborhood. All the old stuff is going, all the low-rise stuff is going, and you're just getting a cookie-cutter city is rising. So it's not unique to Korea, and it's not unique to Seoul, but it's extremely strong here. And the problem with 재개발 is, for example, just the last golmok remaining in the downtown area. There's about 2 or 3 of these little narrow lanes which don't exist in really any other city in the world, i.e. a narrow lane that you can't drive a car down, you can walk or take a bicycle down, lined largely with Hanoks. The last of those in downtown is now under 재개발 and will be destroyed, I think, in about the next 2 years. And that's a loss that once gone can never be returned. So it's tragic, and it's, as again, you know, modern development is not unique to Korea. The pace of it may be, but I think Seoul is particularly bad at this, even compared to other cities across Asia.
Right, which is why perhaps the efforts by Jeonbuk National University to preserve our Hanoks could be one way to deal with that. Going back to the idea of including Korean words in English articles, so words like Andrew's 골목 and 재개발 were used in his articles, and some people say it's no longer awkward perhaps to use Korean words in such context, because the world perhaps, in light of the popularity of K-pop and K-movies, is more open to Korean words and diction, so forth. Do you agree?
Absolutely. If you go down to any of the palaces, you'll see, you know, the groups of tourists, often European, often Southeast Asian, or in their hanboks, sitting around talking Korean. And they've learned it from watching K-drama or listening to K-pop. I had a friend from Afghanistan come out a month ago. I met her in Afghanistan. She was a refugee, went to Denmark, came out here for a little look around to visit. We went to a restaurant, and I was struggling to ask the woman, can we bring a table from inside and put it on the pavement? And she just lapses into perfect Korean, and but not with great accent. And you know, I was like, how on earth? And she said, oh, I'm addicted to K-dramas. I'm addicted to K-dramas. And I've seen this over and over again. I mean, people aren't just learning words. So many people are learning fluent Korean just through their interaction with popular content, whether it be music or whether it be the dramas. Even actually, I was in America last year doing a documentary with a couple of people who were in their 80s, and they were also addicted. This was down in New Mexico, African-American male and a white American lady, and they also knew a lot of Korean, like as much as I could speak, or perhaps a little bit more, and they were asking me, trying through the drinking culture, and am I supposed to give it, or do you do this? And so the fascination is absolute, and there's very few people I meet these days. In fact, everybody I know, even my friends in Texas, are all sitting around watching K-drama. And so, yeah, it's not just words. I mean, I'm embarrassed that their Korean is better than mine.
Right. Andrew, Jack mentioned hanboks, and even among the young here in Korea, there is renewed interest in this traditional Korean attire. What are your thoughts on that?
Can I cast a slightly more cynical opinion? I see, people from all over the world walking around the palace, because I drive past the palace or walk past it every day. You know, and this is the selfie generation. You've just got to look good, clickety-click, in your nice polyester royal hanbok. This is not what the average Korean used to wear. A Korean in late Choson could spend his entire life and never see a hanbok, anything like that. This is not what the people wore in the villages. But anyway, I mean, so it's nice to see it, but you put them on for 30, 40 minutes, take your photos, put them on Insta, take them off, back to jeans and t-shirts. And frankly, I mean, at least where I live in downtown, I see very, very few people beyond tourists, both Koreans and locals, actually wearing legit tailor-made hanbok. Occasionally people roll them out for ceremonials, weddings, and you might see people in traditional restaurants wearing them as they greet the customers, but it's not something that I'm seeing much in day-to-day living. That's rather different in Vietnam. People will wear the outsai. In Malaysia, people will actually wear the baju Melayu to go to work. If you saw President Yoon meeting President Marcos in the Philippines, President Marcos was wearing the barong Tagalog, the traditional shirt of the Philippines. This is everyday wear in some parts of Asia. Here in Korea, at least I'm not seeing much hanbok wearing outside the tourism and hospitality area.
Right, unfortunately. Well, there is a fair in Insadong this weekend that showcases the designers hoping to come up with a hanbok that's more comfortable to wear in everyday life.
Sunny, I think you should get down there and stick one on yourself.
I actually should. We have time for one more question, Jack. I'll give it to you. Aside from the interest in traditional shelter and clothing, there's also interest in food, snacks actually. Yakgwa is making a comeback. For those of our viewers who may not be familiar with yakgwa, could you tell us a bit about it?
Well, I think yakgwa might be even more popular, but I've been coming here since the early 2000s and eating them since back then. I mean, it's a lovely little sweet, sort of in the shape and size of a flower. Wheat and honey. I think there's some ginger juice and some sesame oil in there as well, and deep fried. And my son absolutely loves them. And I think, yeah, I mean, they've always been quite popular. They used to be more sort of chuseok and weddings and things like that, but they are part of, a huge retro wave. We see it in retro soju, retro beer, retro snacks, whether they're children's snacks or anju for drinking, or we see retro clothes. I was at the Armed Forces Day the other day, and I was surrounded by young Koreans in the clothes I wore in the 80s with 35mm film cameras, and you know, and it was terrific. And I think it's. You know, we're seeing it in fashion and in technology, in clubs and bars, just everywhere. And I think it speaks to a few things, but primarily I think in younger Koreans to that sort of insecurity, perhaps in life a little bit. And this digital age we live in where we don't possess, everything's in the cloud, or isn't it nice to have an LP that you can own and read the sleeve and actually have your photos and put them in the album, and you know, and it's kind of like comfort food. Back to our childhood, or even beyond that, if we look at dramas like Mr. Sunshine and, you know, sort of going really back in time. So I think it's fun to look back at the quality of things in the past, the slightly slower pace of life, but also just that reassuring feeling of tapping back into things when we were young in this increasingly economically and geopolitically shaky world we're in at the moment. It's like comfort food on a massive scale. I indulge in it myself as well.
Some say it's old as gold, and the wisdom of those words are being played out in recent times. All right, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Jack, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. And Andrew, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for this week's editions of Press Perspective. Have a great weekend, and do remember to join us again same time next Monday.